That's the only part that gets posted online.
Yeah. Our crazy conspiracy theories. We'll keep that under wraps for now. That's a different podcast we can do.
That'll get you some clicks.
Yeah, for sure. Welcome back to the Salty Nerd Podcast. We have been gone for a long time, and now we're back, and we're better than ever. We've got some new audio equipment, new laptops, new microphones. We're doing good stuff over here, so we'll try to make our content a little bit more, current. We've got big plans, so stick with us. And I want to do a quick shout out to our sponsor, as always, Organically Wonderful. You guys can go to organicallywonderful.com, select some of their products that you might be interested in using. Everything's 100% organic, non-toxic, good for you, good for your skin, good for your hair, all kinds of cool stuff. And they actually gave us a discount code. So if you go to the checkout counter, you can type in SALTY15 and get 15% off your full purchase, which is freaking awesome. So thank you, Organically Wonderful, for that. And today's podcast, we're going to be doing movie news, talking about some current things that are going on in the nerd culture world with the MCU, Star Wars, Game of Thrones, the new Batman that's coming out with Matt Reeves. So we'll have a lot of cool discussion to go on. And I am joined once again by my awesome co-host, Dusty. Welcome back, man.
Thank you so much. Fresh off a prison sentence. I appreciate you picking me up and bringing me here to the podcast.
Well, I had to get somebody that was competent back. It's hard to find people.
Yeah, those temps that were posing as Dusty.
Yeah.
This is the Dusty from the first Cinematic Universes podcast.
Yep.
The other ones have been clones.
Yeah, you can think of it like, kind of like the James Bond, where it's just it's a code name, and everybody's just a little different.
Right.
But it's all still Dusty.
Yeah.
Just different versions.
Exactly. It'll make sense as we proceed.
Yeah, going full sci-fi on that. All right, so let's dive into our topics, because this podcast, I got complimented one time. They said there's zero fluff in your podcast. They were like, thank you for that.
That's
like,
good.
No problem.
That's on purpose, too.
Yeah, it is on purpose. So the first topic we have, we're going to be talking about the MCU. Now, you finally got a chance to go see Endgame, which is awesome, and I saw it opening night, and I loved it. I haven't gotten a chance to see it a second time, but I do plan on doing that. I have a couple movies I got to catch up on. I got to go watch John Wick and a couple other ones. But give me your thoughts on Endgame. What were you thinking?
I thought that it was a very effective way to wrap up these last few years of the MCU. Everything was leading up to it. It was tied up neatly with a bow. Mm-hmm. I thought it was well done. It was a little long in the beginning, but I understood why they did it that way. They got to build some tension for what happens later on. I thought there was nice balance between all the characters. And I also felt that it was planned really well in that, let's say you're someone that's been watching these films from the very first Iron Man movie, and you're satisfied now. You're like, okay, I've seen everything. I want to jump off now, and I'm not really into following where the Marvel Universe goes. Mm-hmm. This is a perfect spot to end it. If you're a new viewer, maybe you haven't, watched any of the Marvel movies. Maybe you intended to, but never got around to it, but you felt there was too much history to catch up on. The next phase of Marvel Cinematic Universe will be a perfect jumping on point for you.
Yes, I concur. It's a really great way, like you said, to wrap up the 11 years, 22 films. I believe it was really satisfying for a lot of the main character arcs, like Tony, Cap. I know they're going to move forward with Thor. Chris Hemsworth has mentioned that he's down for playing Thor for as long as they'll let him. So I don't think he's going anywhere anytime soon. But I enjoyed his character arc. What did you think of Fat Thor? Did you like it, or did you like it?
I love how he stayed fat the entire time.
Dude, it was, to me, that showed that they had some stones on him to be able to do that. Like when you first see him as Fat Thor, I was like, oh, it's going to be like a haha joke, and then he's going to, like, in the middle of a fight or something, he's going to lightning himself back to having a six-pack.
Right.
And it never happened. And I was like, oh, he's going to drink some elixir on Asgard or something. And they didn't do it. They kept him chunky. And I was like, okay, cool. I was going for it. I know some people, a friend of mine, Jenna, she did not like it. She was like, can you imagine if Captain America was fat? It's just a stupid gimmick. I didn't like it. I'm here to watch superheroes. They're supposed to be, the gods among men. They're supposed to be fit. And then she watched it a second time. She's like, okay, I wasn't as mad the second time. I get it. I understand why they were doing it, so it's fine. But like,
Yeah.
I can see the argument. You know, it's like you're there to watch superheroes. You don't want to see them be fat, lazy, melted ice cream like Rocket Raccoon called them.
Well, I understand where she's coming from, but I disagree in that you do have to deal with the fallout of a world in which basically, you know, the entire world was like cut in half. There's actually a YouTube video online. There's like a sociologist and like a psychologist and an economist, and they're discussing what would realistically happen if half the population suddenly disappeared. But there's a great deal of trauma that people in general would experience in society. And I thought it was a very novel take on this character, because going back to the very first film, you see that this entire culture he's grown up in has lauded him as like this Uberman. You know, you are the ultimate man. You are the what is it, like the standard that we all aspire to. And he believes that himself. You know, he's very cocky. Yeah. He's very he's very self-assured. We'll put it that way. And when it comes down to the critical moment, he messes up. He screws up. And not only that, he starts reflecting on other times where he felt he should have been there to save people, like his mother dying, his father dying, and what have you. And it's all catching up to him. There's a great deal of trauma that he's dealing with, shattered expectations around his identity. He suddenly comes to realize that he wasn't strong enough in his mind, and maybe his concept of, you know, who he is supposed to be was incorrect. He's clearly struggling with depression. And that's why there's that one little scene that's very poignant. It's when, before him and Rocket go back to the future, he calls for Mjolnir, and he's overjoyed to find out that he's still worthy. You know, and I thought that was a very nice nod to people that might be going through that type of mental health issue. Yeah. You know, you may be struggling a great deal with feelings of shame and worthlessness, but at the end you are still worthy.
Yeah. I love that message. It was a really good one, and I appreciate that the Russos stuck to their guns and actually followed through with it. I think it was really cool. And of course it makes all us not so fit dads out there like, yeah, we can still, you know, the thing that I took away from it is like, obviously all the things that you just said, but then at the end where he gets his armor back on, he's got both hammers, he's got his big braided beard, he's like, you don't have to have a six-pack, you can still throw down, you know, you can still be the man and friggin' take on whatever challenge that you need to take on. I like that. I thought that was a really cool message. Not that I don't want to, you know, go and be fit like a healthy human being, but still, I just thought it was really cool that you can still prove yourself worthy, and you don't have to, you know, look like Chris Hemsworth, you know what I mean? So yeah, I enjoyed that.
That, you know, it's you see that with the other two founding Avengers also. With Captain America, he becomes a lot softer. You know, he's working through the support groups. Yeah. He's sort of working with people on an individual level.
You know, I thought it was interesting is he took on Falcon's role from Winter Soldier. That's where he met Falcon. He was in a support group for wounded veterans and stuff.
For vets, yeah, that's true. And then there's also in Tony Stark's path as well. You know, another person that not so much with his brawn, his might, but with his mind. Yeah, you know, someone who finally, you know, had to come to grips with the fact that he couldn't figure everything out. He couldn't save everyone, so to speak. It's like they had this inflated sense of themselves, maybe subconsciously, that don't worry, we'll fix things in the end. We'll take care of it. And all of that was shattered completely. And it's about rebuilding that and becoming a better person for it, because you recognize that some things are out of your control, and that's okay.
Yeah, yeah. And like you said, all three of those guys had awesome character arcs. I really enjoyed what they did in Endgame. And of course, I think the accumulation of all these Marvel characters being able to be put into one film and used at the best possible way, I think it speaks to the Russos and their ability to write a story with that many characters and have everybody have a satisfying ending. I think it was great. Everything about it I loved. I know that there's some plot holes with the time travel that people have brought up that are all 100% legitimate criticisms of. They establish some rules that they don't really follow through with at the end. And one of the ones I wanted to bring up was, because I have a theory about it that I think kind of fits, and I'm sure somebody could poke a hole in it, but for me, this is how I thought of it. At the very end, when you had Captain come back as an old man, they were saying that like that doesn't fit because if he would have went back and lived a different life, the way the film establishes it in the beginning is that would have set off a splinter timeline, and he would not have been able to come back to the main timeline.
Yeah,
and that's 100% logical, and if that's how you want to think of it, you can. The way I thought of it was, and it's kind of being supported. I haven't read into it very much, but with some of the what is it, Agent Carter TV show and stuff like that. Apparently, she had like a husband, quote unquote husband, in that show that she never talked about or she never showed anybody. She never introduced him.
Okay.
So my idea is that Captain actually goes back in the main timeline into the, I guess, 50s, maybe 40s after the war, and lives his life with Agent Carter. At the same time, there's a second Captain America in that same timeline doing all the things that we saw him do in the movies.
Oh, interesting.
So it makes sense where he brought all the stones back to where they belonged. He brought the timeline back to a main one timeline, and then he just lived out his life, and he basically watched himself go through everything that we saw in the MCU.
Yeah.
And the only thing he would have to do is just basically stay out of stay in the shadows, stay low key. He's not going to be able to get involved in any kind of big major plot points for the MCU because he already knows that, well, the other me is out there doing it, so I don't have to.
Yeah.
So, and then he just shows up at the end of Endgame, passes off the shield to Falcon.
I like that. That ties things up really neatly.
Yeah.
I'm sure it must have occurred to the screenwriters at some time, and they probably decided in the end, well, screw it. We need to have a moment where Cap passes the mantle to Sam. So, it might not make sense, but whatever.
I like my theory. I think it makes sense.
I think it's a good theory.
That's how I think of it. We've already established that there can be two captains in the same universe. It doesn't like break the continuum or anything. So it makes logical sense that that's what he did to me, and that's what I'm sticking to.
That's a good point. I like that. I like the contrast between the two Thanoses as well. You have the one from the past who's still very cocky.
He's very bloodthirsty, too.
He's bloodthirsty, brazen, because he has not yet experienced the sacrifice that the future Thanos had to go through to gain all the different Infinity Stones.
Yep.
I keep calling them gems. That's what they're called in the comics, the stones.
Infinity Stones. I like that he loved himself. Did you see his smile on his face when he was watching that hologram of himself when he was like, I am inevitable?
Yeah.
He was like, ooh, I like that line.
Right.
He's like, good job, me.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's funny that he used it later, too, so it stuck with him. He's like, oh, man, that's a sick line. I'm going to use that later.
Yeah.
He's such a cocky.
He is, but that's why he's called, in the comics, the Mad God. He's not like a true god, but he's thrust himself into that role.
Yeah, he thinks of himself that way.
Yeah, he's very narcissistic in that way.
Yeah. How did you feel about the passing of the torch to Sam? Did you want it to be Bucky, or were you cool with it being Falcon?
It's always been supposed to be Sam in the comics.
Okay.
So it's kind of like with Batman, it was always going to go to Dick Grayson eventually. In the comics, it's always going to be Sam eventually because that's Cap's best friend, for years. It did go to Bucky in the comics for a while after the Winter Soldier storyline where they reintroduced him into the Marvel Universe in the comics. But I believe that Sam actually is Captain America right now in the proper Marvel Comics universe.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So so my question about that would be, Sam's he's got to juice up then, right? Because he's just a normal human. He's not going to be able to take on Captain America's role. He might be able to take it on as a philosophy as the role, but he's not strong enough to be Cap. He's got to have that superhuman serum or whatever. So do you think they're going to show somebody found some stashed away in S.H.I.E.L.D.'s bunker somewhere? They juice up Sam so he's got superhuman powers? Because Bucky has superhuman powers. He's got the same serum as Captain does. So Sam is just a normal person. Do you think they're going to do that, or do you think they're going to roll with it?
I don't know. They could go in that direction. The thing with this new chapter in the Marvel Cinematic Universe is that they have an opportunity to sort of break with the comic. I mean, they already have, in a lot of ways. But they can go in a completely brand new direction now if they really want to. They really could do that. It is a possibility. I think in the comics he doesn't have that. He's just, he has his same powers and abilities, except now he has the shield and the mantle. And I think that the emphasis is more on like his tactical skills, his leadership skills, and what have you.
Okay.
And he's still a very effective combat
I mean, we
fighter.
can see him as Falcon. He's able to hold his own.
Yeah.
But like just to comparison, if you're going to throw him into a fight like taking on Thanos, Falcon's not going to stand a chance.
Yeah.
You know, one punch is going to knock his head off.
Right. He'll just serve a different role, I suppose, is what it is.
Okay.
Right. There is one possibility, though, that they could bring. Well, I'll save that for when we get to the next part of this discussion.
Okay. I don't really have much left to add to Endgame. I think it was a really well done movie. I liked all the characters, like I said before. So we can move on. We're going to be talking about the Disney Plus streaming service that's going to be taking on all these extra Marvel TV shows, even for some characters who have died. Spoiler alert. In the MCU, they're going to be coming back for their own TV show, which I thought was interesting. Especially, is Vision going to be in Scarlet Witch's?
Yep.
So he's dead, and he never came back in Endgame. Like the soul gem was taken from him, so I don't know how they're going to. I don't know how they're going to bring that back.
It seems because remember he's an android, so all they got to do is copy his
consciousness.
His consciousness.
But it wasn't the Mind Stone is what gave him the life, basically, isn't it?
In the movies, yeah, I think it was. But this is what's kind of ambiguous. I've been looking around online to see if there's a definitive answer, but doesn't seem to be one, which is that they may have brought him back, when they restored all the people who had been...
They undid the snap.
When they undid the snap. Mm-hmm. So it may be that he was there and just sat it out for some reason that we're not aware of. Or maybe without the Soul Stone, we have a completely different type of Vision, and maybe it didn't occur to him to join this battle or what have you because it's not the same person that we're talking about.
Okay. And you had some thoughts on that TV show.
Yeah.
Where do you think it's going to go? I'm not I'm kind of on the fence of whether or not, like you said, I'm a Marvel fan since Iron Man, the first one. Now that Endgame's done, I'm kind of like, okay, I don't have to go any farther. Obviously, I'm probably going to, but I might not follow it as closely as like a new fan might.
Right. You feel satisfied.
Yeah, I'm satisfied with what I got. I loved all my characters. The main people that I've been following are either moved on or gone. So I'm kind of like, okay, I can step back if I want to and feel like I'm good.
Yeah.
So I don't really have any idea what the Scarlet Witch and Vision TV show is going to be all about.
Yeah, I was looking at these miniseries, and apparently they're not ongoing series. They're limited series.
So it's good. Yeah, okay.
They're going to be I think they said 10 to 12 episodes each.
Okay, like a 10-hour movie each one then.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And all of them seem to be based off existing short-lived comic books.
Okay. So that's cool that they're going back to the source material. That's always good. Yeah.
So the one with the Scarlet Witch and the Vision is going to be called WandaVision.
That's what it's called?
Yeah. Wanda's her real name.
Yeah.
I think it might be a working title.
Yeah, that's a weird title. WandaVision. That's
weird. So I might be spoiling things here. So fast forward in the podcast if you don't want to know what happens.
Spoiler alert for future content.
In the comics, the Vision and the Scarlet Witch get married.
Okay.
They have a very tumultuous relationship, both internally and also externally. They face a lot of prejudice because it's an interspecies relationship.
Okay.
Because he's an android, of course.
Right.
And
so we're talking like Data from Star Trek. And what's the girl's name?
Tasha Yar.
Tasha, yeah.
Yeah, that could be it. Scarlet Witch, I don't know if they're going to touch on this, but she has a lot of trauma. Emotional trauma because her father was Magneto,
right.
Abandoned her when he found her later on, tried to recruit her into his terrorist cell, was very abusive and controlling to her.
Okay. So we kind of had that with, I think Ultron kind of took on that role.
Right. Yeah. So that's definitely existing in the character. So in the comics, his emotions, so to speak, get wiped and he's sort of like this, very logical, just like Data from Star Trek, data-driven, logic-driven individual that aspires to be human but just doesn't know how to connect with his wife.
So maybe that's what the Mind Stone gives him.
Maybe that's what it is.
And if they take that away, he's going to be more like the typical android, very analytical, no emotion. Okay.
Right. And then basically, long story short, she's so desperate to cling to him, to keep her in his... She has this very strong codependency with him that with her reality-altering powers... she actually makes herself pregnant and gives birth to children.
Whoa.
And then end of a long, convoluted story.
Okay, I got some questions on how that works, but okay.
Right, because that's the thing, right? She can't get pregnant. He's an android.
Right.
But she gives birth to children, and then they had this convoluted story. But what it ended up being was that they never existed in the first place, and they vanished from reality. And so she's has to grieve now these two, deceased children that never existed.
That's deep. I don't know if Disney's going to do that.
Yeah. And it causes a rift between them. Vision becomes desperate to start a family. He builds his own android family, which ends in tragedy as well.
Okay. You know what that reminds me of? That reminds me of, did you ever watch Voyager, Star Trek Voyager? Yeah. Remember when the Doctor wanted to create his own holographic family?
Yeah.
And it just went straight to hell?
Right.
And I think it was B'Elanna who was like, they went over to dinner to his house, right? And there was like, everything was like a 1950s picture perfect family.
Right.
Everybody was 100% well behaved. Everybody did what they told her. And B'Elanna was like, this is not a real family. There's no conflict here. There's no real emotion. So he like reprogrammed them. And like his son was like some rebellious hanging out with Klingons, and his daughter ended up getting sick and dying. And it was just like this horrible experience for him, but it like brought him closer to humanity. So I wonder if they're going to, I mean, that's a deep subject for Marvel.
This could definitely be a very, very heavy miniseries. Yeah. I think with the right screenwriter, they could pull it off, because Paul Bettany and Elizabeth Olsen definitely have the acting chops and the acting creative maturity to pull it off. But this could be a really interesting spin, on Marvel, where it hasn't really gone before in the main films.
Okay.
So that's one. The other series I was looking at that look interesting. So there's speaking of Sam, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier.
This one I'm actually looking forward to, because I loved their dynamic in Civil War, where they were kind of at odds with each other, but they were tolerating each other, and it was really well done with the humor. I thought it was all really funny, especially that moment when they were in the car, and I think it was Bucky in the back seat, and he's like, "Can you move your seat up?" And Sam's like, "No." And they just sat there, just pissed off at each other. Like, I'm looking forward to seeing that kind of dynamic moving forward in the MCU, especially with Sam taking on the role as Bucky. He's going to have to take on a leadership role, which, did I say Sam? Yeah, Sam's going to take on the leadership role, which I don't know exactly how Bucky would react to that, having to take orders from Sam. He might not like that. So we might get some more of that little conflict comedy going back and forth between them.
Yeah.
But I like the idea that you mentioned before about it being kind of like a spy thriller, more along the lines of Winter Soldier, them going off and doing jobs for the government and maybe some spy stuff. I thought that would be really cool.
Yeah, the comics it seems to be based off of is, so for a while, Captain America, his comic series in the 70s was changed to Captain America and the Falcon. Mm-hmm. And it became a much more heavily political series, because it was based on the idea that what would happen to a man if you plucked him from this, basically the greatest generation, World War II, and you put him into the 1970s, where all the things that you are supposed to, in the American culture anyway at that time, have confidence and trust in, are no longer trustworthy. Mm. So they had a storyline that was a clear nod to the Watergate scandal, where Cap becomes completely disillusioned with the government and even completely abandons the guise of Captain America.
Okay. We see him do that a little bit with S.H.I.E.L.D., I think, in Civil War and Winter Soldier, too.
Yeah. There was a lot of callbacks to the fallout from Vietnam, to the fallout from the Civil Rights Movement. And for Bucky's part, the Winter Soldier, that was in the 2000s. And for that, they got into a great deal of history with the Cold War and with post 9/11 politics. Okay. So my feeling is that there's going to be a lot of political drama in there. It's going to definitely be a spy thriller, I think, like you've brought up.
Yeah.
I think this is the one I'm looking forward to the most as well. This is going to be a really, really interesting one.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what they do. And I like both the actors. Sebastian Stan is probably my favorite out of the two. Mm-hmm. I'd like to see him in more stuff. Have you ever seen, I think we may have talked about this before, but have you ever seen the side-by-side comparison of 1980s Mark Hamill and Sebastian Stan?
I did see that.
I'm low-key hoping that he gets grabbed by, he's already working for Disney, so I'm hoping just maybe they'll take that idea and splinter off and do like like a young Luke Skywalker thing. Which I know some people are going to hate, because obviously Mark Hamill is Luke Skywalker. You can't substitute him in for anything. But if they're going to do it, I would want them to use Sebastian Stan.
Right. Yeah, I think I like the idea. These miniseries, they're all going to be employing these really skilled actors. You know, Anthony Mackie. I don't know too much about Sebastian Sam before this. I should take a look at his work. I am familiar with Mackie's work. He's a very, very skilled actor.
Yep, he was
very versatile.
He was in that. I think it was an HBO movie about Lyndon B. Johnson.
Oh, okay. He played MLK, right?
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, he was Martin Luther King, and I think he knocked it out of the park. I really liked that. That movie was really good.
Yeah.
And I know I've been following his work for a while. He's solid. I like his acting. Sebastian Stan, I don't know what he's done in the past before he was Bucky. I can't think of anything. I'm sure he's done something, but I don't think I've seen it.
I hope he isn't listening to this right now, and
nobody's listening to this.
Our moms are.
Yeah.
Well, maybe yours.
No, mine doesn't give a no.
Oh, not even our moms are listening to this. All right. Well,
I got some random guy from Chicago who's listening to it.
I agree with that.
Yeah. Shout out to Roger.
All right. So, Hawkeye is the next one. So there was a Hawkeye miniseries. It's the fallout in the comics from his divorce and a bunch of other things that happened in his life that were very traumatic.
Okay.
He basically died and was brought back to life.
I think they might deal with the aftermath of Endgame.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it's going to take place before Endgame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because he spent 5 years being basically an assassin, just off on his own, vigilante, killing people. And then his family got brought back. So he's going to have to transition into that. And he might actually have to deal with the fallout of going on some kind of a crazy rampage for 5 years. Like he's going to have a lot of enemies at that point.
Right.
That are all going to spontaneously come back and be like, hey, who killed all my people? Oh, it was this guy.
Right.
Like, I think that's a way for them to go. I'm not sure if that's how they're going to do it, but that's a definite timeline that they could, or a storyline that they could follow.
Yeah. And in Endgame, you definitely see the fallout from having that much violence in his life. You know? Like in that one scene with the Soul Stone, he's almost begging to let Natasha kill him. He's like, I don't deserve to to live
after
past
everything
this point.
I've done.
Right. And he knows they're wicked people, but at the same time, life is life that he's taken.
Yeah.
It's a heavy load to bear. The comic that it seems to be based on, Hawkeye was holed up in this apartment complex. There's like a second Hawkeye, his protege. She's like this rich girl.
Okay. You think it might be his daughter? Because they showed her practicing with the bow.
You know what? That could be. In the comics, it wasn't, but that would make a lot of sense in the cinematic universe. Basically, he's in this apartment complex. He comes to have to protect this all his neighbors.
Okay.
It's like a low-income apartment, and they become like his de facto family. And he's got to protect them from the Russian mob. It's like this really violent, dark comedy.
Okay.
So that might be the direction they take it in.
Yeah, just substitute a couple of things that we already know is established in the MCU, and you could input that storyline for sure.
Absolutely.
Have his daughter, maybe his family, they have to leave their farmhouse for whatever reason. And they, like you said, they end up in some kind of a hidden place where the government's protecting them at some low income area. Right. And he ends up having to protect the whole building from the people who are after him.
Like, hide out here, don't blow your cover.
Yeah,
and he's like, I gotta blow my cover.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I can see that. They could definitely work that in. That'd be kind of fun. So I'm getting more excited for these shows that I was planning on not watching.
I'm interested to see what they do with Loki. So that comic, he's kind of traveling throughout the 9 realms.
Yes. Now, this is interesting because in Endgame, spoiler alert, he gets the Tesseract back after the Battle of New York and disappears off on his own. So that, in essence, that creates a splinter timeline. So he could be off doing things completely out of the realm of the MCU, and he could do things that would have affected the MCU as we know it, but because it's a splinter timeline, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's like a one-off. Like he can just go off into Elseworld kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I think that might be pretty cool.
I think so too. One thing I've always wanted to see brought in from the comics, and they did explain this, I think, the same way in the first Thor movie, which is that all the pantheons of gods from mankind's early history are not gods per se. They're just more advanced aliens. Mm-hmm. And we perceive them to look like whatever it is we associate men and women to be.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, I remember Kenneth Branagh, I heard an interview with him where he's like, who was that? The director of the first Thor movie. Where somebody was saying, oh, so they're supposed to be aliens, but they look just like humans, like Star Trek. And his explanation, if I remember correctly, was that, no, see, they're higher dimensional entities. So we're going to imprint on them whatever we think a higher dimensional entity would look like. Like, like how people imagine God to be like a man with a king with a beard and on. That's how a person at that time might think of Odin or Loki. So in the comics, there's all these other pantheons of gods, the Egyptian, or what we would call the Egyptians, and the Chinese and what have you, the Assyrians, and they're all other legions, or not legions, kingdoms or realms of aliens. So that would be kind of cool to see him dip through all the different mythologies,
Yeah.
That would be kind of an interesting thing to do. Or even if he just stays within the realms of the Norse, the mythology of Thor, that would be very interesting too, because it wasn't really explored that much.
They in the first Thor movie they mentioned that there was 9 realms, and we kind of see them bounce around between them in some of the movies. We see Thor go to war at some of the different areas,
right?
But overall, it's been pretty sparse.
Yeah.
So we could definitely see Loki jumping around the galaxy doing crazy stuff.
Might even be post-apocalyptic, because they literally went through Ragnarok where everything was destroyed. So it could be picking up the pieces in these different realms, seeing how all these societies are coming back together.
Yeah. And Tom Hiddleston loves being Loki, and he knocks it out of the park every time.
Fantastic actor. Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of promise there too. If they have a good storyline, I'm not as interested in that one as I am about like the Bucky and Cap or the Bucky and Sam one, but it would be fun to watch, and I know a lot of people are looking forward to it, so it'd be kind of cool.
And the last one they have is What If. So What If was a famous Marvel comic series where basically each issue was a standalone story, and it was what if something critical to Marvel history, Marvel Comics history changed. So what if Captain America was never recovered from the ice? What if, Magneto never made it out of the Holocaust? What if Iron Man never, received shrapnel in his heart or what have you? And it would paint an alternate timeline. You'd see how things might turn out. So I think that's the tack they're going through with this. The most natural approach would be to make it like an anthology series, like the Twilight Zone or the Outer Limits, I feel.
Yeah.
It might be tricky, though, to get these different... I don't know who they have contracted for this one. This one, there seems to be the least amount of information for out there.
Okay.
And it could be because they're still trying to work out which actors they can still get for this particular series.
Yeah, I mean, as much as we'd all like to see Robert Downey Jr., I mean, that's a hefty price tag just to get him to come back.
Right, for like one episode.
Yeah, for one episode. He's going to be a couple $1 million. That'll blow your budget just to have him there. So, yeah, I'm not sure what they're going to do with that. That's interesting. I think they kind of set up a way that they can do all these things with this multiverse that they're bringing in.
Right.
So like each one of those one-off sections, instead of being a different timeline, quote unquote, it could be a different universe. Like, this is universe 2210.
Yeah, I didn't think about that.
And then it can just be like, okay, this is what happens in this universe, and that's why Iron Man doesn't exist in this universe.
I bet that's what they're going to do.
And I think that might be the way that they would go if they're going to move forward with this.
Right.
And even in that case, if they want to change the universe, they don't necessarily have to get the same actor to play the character. They could bring in, this is Tony Stark from this universe. He looks like,
right, but he's 19 here.
Yeah, or whatever. Yeah, they just get a different actor to come in and do it. That's the option. I mean, literally, they have all the options in the world. It's a comic book. They can literally do whatever they want.
Right.
Just make it work.
And speaking of the multiverse, it looks like that's going to be introduced in the next Spider-Man film.
Dope segue. Yes, so that was in the trailer for the newest Spider-Man Far From Home. Mysterio, played by Jake Gyllenhaal, mentions that he is from multiverse or universe 881 or 882, or I think it was the number he used. I have to look it up. I might be completely wrong. But anyway, that one little snippet of information just opens up a whole new can of worms for the Marvel Universe, where we're going to be able to, like I said, explore all these other universes out there. And it even looks like... So Mysterio in the comic books and in the cartoon, the old Spider-Man cartoon, he was a special effects artist, where he was and kind of almost like a magician, where he was able to do these kind of things that were just illusions. They didn't have any real power behind them. He was able to trick people, and that was his quote unquote superpower. And in this new movie, if you look closely, if you pause the trailer a couple times, you'll notice that when he's using his powers, he's got those same symbols that Doctor Strange uses when he's using his powers. So he's almost in the realm of Sorcerer Supreme type character, where he has these magical powers that he's using. And there's speculation that in this movie he's actually going to be the one who's behind all these entities, these lava monsters and these sand and water monsters and stuff, where they're just illusions that he's creating to make himself look like a hero.
That makes sense.
And he's going to kind of do like the syndrome thing from Incredibles, where he wants to be a hero. Maybe in his universe he's not, but in our universe he can be.
Yeah.
So he makes all the trouble up himself, and then he goes and pretends to stop it, which of course Peter might find out, and then they conflict on that, and then Peter has to take him down, because we know Mysterio is being a villain. He's going to be the villain, but he's played out like a hero in these trailers. I think that might be the switch that we'll see in the second act.
That makes sense. See, guys, you don't have to watch it after all.
We
just saved you some money.
Spoiler alert for Far From Home.
So I just looked it up. Earth 833.
833. Okay.
Is the one they mention. Okay, this is interesting. It says 833 is the home reality of the Elementals.
Okay.
The Elementals is one of the films that Kevin Feige says they have on the slate for the next 5, I guess. If I remember correctly, they were like one of the races of beings that were created they're like immortals. They're created to protect the Earth.
Okay.
So maybe that is going to be the introduction into these Elementals. I don't know.
Okay.
Could be.
Anything else for Spider-Man or multiverses?
So this was just a funny. Some people were mentioning it on Reddit. I was thinking about it myself. There is an opportunity. Depends on how professional they are. I don't know if they want to spend money on this, for Marvel to kind of take the piss out of DC, so to speak, more time, but more directly. There is a comic series, a famous one from the early 80s, I believe, and they brought it back about 10 years ago, called the Squadron Supreme. And they are a fictional superhero team that are basically analogs for the Justice League. So
okay.
They had their own version of Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, The Flash, and what have you, except Marvelized, right? So much more maybe ambiguous backstories and characteristics. And I just thought it would be really funny if they made us, because they're part of the multiverse, if Marvel went ahead with a Squadron Supreme film just to show DC, look, this is how you make a Justice League movie the right way.
Oh, God. DC fans would have a fit. They already, it was funny. I saw a couple of friends of mine online shared a picture of a couple of screenshots from Justice League, or maybe it was Batman versus Superman.
Okay.
One of the two. It was selected screenshots from that movie, and then side by side with selected screenshots from Endgame. And they were like, look, Marvel's just copying DC. And I'm like, yeah, because nobody's ever had two people in the camera section together, and nobody's done a funeral before. And like, it's just like, you can cherry pick any film and make it look like another film.
Yeah.
Is camera setups and the way you shoot a film with the framing and all that stuff, it's going to be copied in like every film.
Right.
But I think it's funny that people who are like trying to defend DC are like, look, Marvel's just copying us. And I'm like, I don't know about that one, bro.
But it's the other way around.
It would be the ultimate troll job, is to have them do this Squadron Supreme thing and just have like some mock Batman or something like that. God, it'd be so bad.
Oh man,
people would riot. I swear to God.
Now I want to see it. I really want to see it. If anyone from Marvel happens to be listening, you may take this idea, where you will
roll with it.
So one of the big stories in the entertainment industry over the last few months was that Disney acquired 20th Century Fox.
Yes.
And in doing so, they reacquired for Marvel the film rights to the X-Men and the Fantastic Four, which is a really big deal. And people are speculating as to how they're going to be introduced into the MCU. Kevin Feige, I believe, recently said that the X-Men, they're putting them on the back burner for a few years because they're not quite sure what to do with them, but hinted that the Fantastic Four, I think he hinted that the Fantastic Four might be introduced in some way.
Okay.
We've never seen the true Fantastic Four on film, this insane, higher science-based, psychedelic, crazy family story. And I'm really excited to see it done the right way.
Hopefully they do it the right way. It'd be awesome. It's hard. I know the Fantastic movies that have come before have had a hard time with that family dynamic. It doesn't come off as natural. It's very forced.
Yeah.
So they're going to have to pull out all the stops and get a really good writing team to get in there and use the best of the storylines to get it done.
Yeah.
I don't have really any kind of connection to Fantastic Four. It was never in my wheelhouse of interest. I've usually been, the typical average Batman, Superman, whatever kind of fan. So the Fantastic Four movies never really hit home with me. I never really paid any attention to them, but I am interested to see what Marvel does, because Marvel typically, for a majority of people, kind of hits home, and they're like, okay, yep, we like that movie. They've done pretty consistent good work, so it is interesting to see what they're going to do with it. And the X-Men, I think the X-Men would be even bigger, because that's a huge intellectual property to have ownership over,
right?
All on its own, and then to mix it in with something that we've established for 10 or 11 years already, it's going to be huge. It's going to be giant.
Yeah.
And it's going to be really curious how they kind of fold them into the overall MCU, or if they're going to keep it separate. Maybe they'll keep it in one of the alternate universes.
That's true. That's true too. That could be an approach that they take, because you do have to ask, if we had the Fantastic Four and these mutants, how come none of them showed up for the Battle of New York, or for the final battle with Thanos? Some rumors out there, speculations I should say, online, are that there's a supposedly throwaway line where it's mentioned that every time they snap the Infinity Gauntlet, it increases the amount of ambient gamma radiation on Earth. So some people think maybe that's what activates the mutant gene, the X gene.
Okay.
Or they're mentioning that the Eternals will get their own movie. One thing from the comics, if I remember, is from a comic called Earth X, which was that the Earth evolved basically mutants to serve as antibodies to protect a celestial being that's growing inside the Earth. So that might be another approach they take as well.
That's out there.
Which puts that into the wheelhouse of the Fantastic Four, because that's the scope of the stories that they have.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I think so. Culturally, those are both very important properties for Marvel to get back. The X-Men and the X-Men universe were probably their most popular franchise property for most of the 90s and 2000s.
Mm-hmm. Besides, I think Spider-Man might be the number one, and then X-Men shortly after that.
Yeah, I mean, when they were putting together Iron Man, the Avengers movies, I remember a lot of people were like, who? Just chuckling like, who is Iron Man? The Fantastic Four is important from a historical standpoint because it was the first true Marvel comic, and it was the first type of superhero team upon which all the other ones were based. So the Avengers, the X-Men, everybody else that we got after that. Really, the interpretation of superhero teams and comics in general was based off the dynamics of the Fantastic Four. So that's going to be a really big deal for Marvel to get back for both of those. I would like to see, because the X-Men did get away from the 20th Century Fox creators. I thought X-Men 2 was the best of the early ones.
Okay.
I liked First Class a lot. A lot of the themes in there were amazing. And then they started to get really silly after that. That's
one of the funnier things that I saw about the First Class section of X-Men movies is that, like, each one was done in a separate decade. Yeah. To kind of call back to those eras. Right. And it's funny. They're like, according to the timeline of the current X-Men movies, all these X-Men are going to be like 60, 70 years old by now, but it's all still just Fassbender and, Sophie Turner for Jean Grey. Like, they're all like in their 20s. Yeah. But they're supposed to be, according to the timeline, they're supposed to be like 70 or 80 years old. Because they were all born in like right after World War II in the 50s, and then in the 60s is when they got First Class, and then the next one was in the 80s, and then this one's in like the 90s. They're like, they aged 40 years, but they look like they're still in their 30s. I thought that was pretty funny. Like, X-Men has like notoriously just not given a crap about timelines. They're just like, this is just an X-Men movie. Don't worry about it.
They're like, he's his powers make him young.
Yeah. That works for Wolverine. That doesn't really work for anybody else.
That's a really interesting point, because they're going to have to explain. They're going to have to use Magneto. I mean, he's one of the great Marvel comic characters of all time. Yeah. But they have to explain why he looks so young, because the Holocaust is an integral part of his story.
Yeah, you can't take that out of his story.
You can't. It's I mean, we're really really just, I mean, the X-Men have always been a popular franchise with minorities of different kinds because of the themes that they speak to.
Yeah, for sure. It's a substitute in for a lot of things.
Yeah, and that's centralized most obviously in, the world's most powerful mutant and ideological figure, aside from Charles Xavier, coming out of the Holocaust, like the worst racial event we can think of in human history. But how do you bring that to bear in the Marvel universe? Because with Ian McKellen, they cast an old man to sort of stretch and say, okay, he could have been a little kid and maybe his powers slow down his aging. But now we're even further separated. We're almost 20 years out from when that first X-Men movie came out. So how are they going to explain that?
This brings up, I think it was on Twitter. I saw somebody say, and I wish I knew who it was. I would shout them out. But they said, I want to start seeing these comic book movies be made in the era where these comics were created. So, like, for me personally, I would love to see Batman in the 1930s. That, like, less gadgets. He's fighting some kind of a mob criminal group.
Focus on his detective skills.
Yeah, focus on his yeah, exactly. He's not James Bond. Focus on his detective skills. Throw the gadgets out the window. Maybe have a grappling hook and something simple, like something to do fingerprints with and whatnot.
Go back to his pulp origins.
Exactly. Yeah, I want to see that for Batman. And when they brought that tweet up, I was like, that's really interesting because, like, we are getting really far away from a lot of the origins of these comic book movies or the comic book characters. And Magneto is a prime example. Like, we can't have him in World War II as a prisoner at from a Nazi or something. It doesn't work anymore. He'd be too old. So you have to set the area back. So the other, with Marvel getting it and with this new introduction of the multiverse and all this stuff, of course they could stretch it and say, well, he's from a different universe where the Holocaust still happened, but it was much later. It didn't happen until the early 2000s. So now he's a young man in our timeline. I mean, they can do all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
But that is an interesting concept to think about. Like, I would love to see these movies as period pieces. Why not?
Yeah.
I think I have a thing about Batman. Like, I want to see Batman in all kinds of different places. I want to see him. There was that one Batman by Gaslight or something.
Oh yeah.
Where it was like
with Jack the Ripper.
With Jack the Ripper.
Yeah.
I'm like, that is fascinating. I would love to see that on the big screen. As live action. I think that'd be so cool. But yeah, it's an interesting idea to see what they're going to do. Of course, they're going to make it work. They'll figure out some excuse why he's alive and all that stuff now. But it is an interesting idea that they're going to have to get around or get over, because they're going to have to explain that. So
because that informs his entire worldview. He's like, this is what humans are going to do.
Yes.
If given license and permission.
Yeah, because they're going to, like, he was a Jew and he got captured by the Nazis, and then when he starts seeing similar things happen to the mutants, which are a surrogate for any minority, when he sees the government start leaning in that direction, he's going to react very, very violently to prevent that from happening. So it's integral to his character, so they have to bring it up.
Yeah.
So we'll see what they do.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Is that it for the MCU?
I think that is it for the MCU.
All right, let's get ready to walk on some eggshells for Star Wars.
Okay.
Oh God, Star Wars! It's like
I'm not on social media, so it doesn't bother me at all.
Oh, it's a love-hate relationship, man. I love Star Wars, but my God, it's just too much sometimes. So Star Wars has a lot of big announcements, and we're going to start off by talking about Game of Thrones, which you don't watch.
Correct.
So I'm going to kind of give you a quick recap on what's going on. Game of Thrones is one of the most popular TV shows in the world, and it just finished its 8th and final season, where a lot of people, including myself, felt like the writers, the showrunners, Weiss and Benioff, dropped the ball pretty hard on these characters. So we've had I would argue that we've had about 6 seasons. Some would say 5. I argue that we had 6 really solid seasons of this show. Everything was well written. Everybody's story arc was like just weaved into the story of the entire show really, really well. These characters were beloved. We had Daenerys going through her trials. We had Jon Snow on the other side of the wall doing his thing, and we had this big monumental force of the White Walkers and the Night King that were a universal threat for everybody in the show. And it was Jon Snow's whole story arc was to get everybody together to fight this undead force. It's the apocalypse that they're coming, and they have to stop it.
Okay.
And through 6 or 7 seasons, 8 years in our, of watching the TV show, we've seen these characters built. And I think we had one of the best redemption arcs ever written on TV is Jaime Lannister, where he was a straight up villain in the first couple of seasons. And in season 3 or 4, he gets cut down he gets humbled. He loses his fighting hand. So he's not the swordsman he used to be. His character got just completely crushed and demolished. And then after that, we started rooting for him. We see his character kind of try and redeem himself. And he goes from 100% villain to one of the favorite heroes in the show. And one of the issues with this last season is that it was so rushed. Everything happened so quickly. We only had 6 episodes to wrap up this 10-year, 8-season TV show. And they just whipped it out real quick. It almost felt like they didn't care anymore. Jaime Lannister, I think, for me personally, Jaime Lannister is the most egregious of the ones because he went through where he was in love with his sister. His sister has always been a villain. She's a very horrible person in the TV show, but he's in love with her the entire time. And he eventually starts to realize what a bad person she is, and he finally breaks away. And it's a big deal for him to break away from this lifelong obsession he's had with her, and he moves on. And his character arc moved away from her, and now he's a good person, and he goes off and he starts to fight for the North, for the living. He's sacrificing his self to go and do something for somebody else, which is way off character for him at the beginning. And then in the last episode, or the last season, he reverts back to like season 2 Jaime, where he's obsessed with his sister again, and he goes back to her, all within 1 or 2 episodes. And we're like, it was such a left turn for the character. We're like, this isn't who he is anymore. That doesn't make any sense. But they did it just to serve the plot. It wasn't really natural for the character to be doing that, and it was really, really rushed and irresponsible for them to do that to his character. And then, of course, we had Daenerys, who's been built up as the hero for the past 7 seasons. She's always been talked about as being a good person. She's a bit harsh. The Targaryens have a bit of a temper problem where they're quick judgment, quick to react to people. They are very, very harsh with their enemies. But she's been always built up to be a different type of person. She's always been really nice. She's always cared more about the people. She's always wanted to serve them and make their lives better. That's her whole story arc, was about her redeeming her father's mistakes. Her father was a crazy Targaryen who wanted to, kill people, was torturing people in his last days, just doing horrible things. And she's always kind of had to redeem her family name from that. And she has for like I said, 7 seasons. And then this last season, in 1 episode, she makes a snap and she becomes that tyrant who is now burning people alive and killing women and children on a whim. And it's just like, it came out of nowhere. And a lot of people are really upset because she was a favorite character. She's always been the hero. We did expect her to maybe die as a consequence of the story that she was in. Maybe somebody killed her, or maybe she died sacrificing herself or something like that. But it was never thought that she was going to make that sharp of a turn. It's possible that they could have flushed that out a bit more over a couple more seasons, maybe 2-3 more seasons, and we could have seen her character go from hero to villain, as we have other characters. We've seen Jaime go from villain to hero. We've seen some other characters make changes where they go from hero to villain or whatever. The characters are always kind of changing, and as the story progresses. But they squeezed a story arc of 2 or 3 seasons into 6 episodes. And they're really, really, the writers are really getting a hard time for this because it's a legit criticism. There's a lot of people who like the movie or like the last season, but it was really well shot. Everything about it was beautiful. The acting was all on point. Everything was good, but it was the story that was the main problem. And these 2 gentlemen, DB, oh God, what's their name? Weiss and Benioff. I don't know what their first. David Weiss and David Benioff are taking on the new Star Wars trilogy. They got hired from Lucasfilm. And it's my suspicion, I have no proof of this, but it's my suspicion, based off some of the things that George R. R. Martin said, who is the guy who wrote the novels of Game of Thrones. He said that they were, and I'm paraphrasing, more or less they were done with this and they wanted to move on to other things. So they from a storyteller standpoint, you'd think that they would want to put their best work to finish off the story.
As artists.
They would want to leave on a high note. But I think they just dropped it to go do Star Wars. They were like, no, we're going to wrap this up. Because HBO offered them 2 extra seasons. They offered to pay. Like, we will pay for 2 more seasons if you write them. And they were like, no, we just need 6 episodes. Because their new movie starts in 2022.
Oh, so they got to start production.
They have to start production now, at least writing now, and then start production next year to get these movies out. So I'm like, are you serious? They have this 10-year legacy of these wonderful characters, and they were like, yeah, we're done. We're going to wrap it up real quick, and then we're going to move on to this other thing. So that has a lot of Star Wars fans who there's a big cross section of Game of Thrones fans and Star Wars fans because it's an epic fantasy, sword fighting, and all this.
A lot of similarities.
So there's a lot of people who are in love with Game of Thrones who also love Star Wars. And now, as a Star Wars fan, after seeing what they did with Game of Thrones, now we're worried. Because not only have we been disappointed in the past with what Disney's been doing, but now we have these guys who have shown that they're kind of just like in it almost for the money. They're not, or maybe not for the money, but just not as interested in the source material as they should be. They don't care if they drop the ball on Game of Thrones because they have something new to go to. So now we're like, oh God, what are they going to do with Star Wars? Are they going to drop the ball on that because the next greener grass comes along and they're just not going to care anymore? And the other criticism is they ran out of source material for Game of Thrones around season 4 or 5. And I think it's undeniable, even if you are a fan of the current seasons and you love everything that they did and you're like, oh, they did great, I love it all. There is a marked difference from when they had source material to when they didn't have source material. And a lot of the characters got a lot dumber.
Yeah.
And a lot of the writing got a lot less intriguing and deep. It was more just surface level stuff. And a lot of the plot points and ideas that it was just kind of like, well, it just wasn't as smart.
Right.
Which I attribute more to the amount of time that they had to write it. The novelist, George R.R. Martin, had years and years and years to flush out all the characters and to make them do what he wanted to do. He had a lot longer to make the story work as opposed to a TV show where they're balancing budget, they're balancing the special effects, they're balancing all this other stuff, and they have to write a story in between all that. As a director and showrunner, I think their jobs are a lot more complicated than writing a story. That somebody's going to yell at me for saying that, but I think that's true.
Well, if you're a total showrunner, it's a lot more moving pieces.
Yeah, so you're going to have to write on top of all your other responsibilities that you have. I think there's something to be said of that. Now, I'm not trying to defend them. I think it's very true that they messed up a lot of the characters and a lot of the stories, just not as well thought out. Like there's a meme going around in one of the episodes. Daenerys was flying her dragons back to her castle, and this fleet of ships came out of nowhere and just shot one of her dragons out of the sky, and it killed one of the dragons. And then everybody was like super shocked, like, oh my God, how did you not see that coming? You're like, a mile in the air and you don't see the ships flying, sailing towards you, shooting at you. And on the after the show, they do interviews with the writers, and one of the writers was like, well, Danny kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet. And they're like, what? They're at war with these people. You don't forget about a main piece of your enemy's war, armada. Like that's a very big threat you have to keep in mind. And there was a scene right before it that they filmed where they were talking about the Iron Fleet being a threat, and we have to make sure that we don't, we keep an eye on them so that we know where they are. And then like 10 minutes later in the same episode, oh yeah, we forgot about the Iron Fleet. It's things like that. Like you kind of see where people are like, oh my God, these people are idiots. They don't know what they're doing. They're horrible at writing. I'm like, it's legit. I can't argue. Like I enjoyed the season for what it was, but I can't argue with the criticisms. It's all legit.
Yeah.
So there's a big worry with what they're going to do with this new trilogy that they've been given by Star Wars.
Yeah, I see that because adaptation is a lot easier than original material, and if they have to come up with original material for these new Star Wars films, that might be where their true their true caliber as writers will come in.
Yeah,
I guess because what I read online was that this is just the rumor. It's going to be about the Old Republic. Is that right?
Yes and no. There is an Old Republic trilogy that has recently been announced. Kathleen Kennedy mentioned it at Star Wars Celebration, and then we've gotten a little bit more news about who's writing and stuff. I can't remember who it was. It was a woman who did a couple of other fairly good movies, wrote them. So I'm actually looking forward to those because she has really good source material to go off. The Old Republic is really fleshed out. There's a beloved video game that is like set the standard for Star Wars video games, and they have a lot of really cool characters to work with. So I'm hopeful for the Old Republic trilogy. Benioff and Weiss, their trilogy has not really been announced when or where it's going to take place. There has been some rumors that are not official or anything like that. I just read them online, that they're going to be taking place thousands of years before any kind of Sith Jedi Republic or whatever happened. It was going to be almost medieval, kind of in the Game of Thrones wheelhouse, where they don't really have spaceships very much, and it's going to be very isolated onto maybe one planet. And the rumor is that it's going to be about when the Jedi and the Sith split. So at one point in time in the Star Wars universe, the Jedi and the Sith were one coherent, almost like a religion, and then one group started to diverge with ideology of how to use the Force, of what's proper. I'm going to use the Force for power and to dominate. And then you had the Jedi side who wanted to use it for peace and knowledge and stuff like that. And we're going to see that camaraderie where they were working together to the point where they were fighting, and then they split. And now we have the Jedi and the Sith. And it's kind of like an origin story for that. It was all rumor, but I think that might be what Benioff and Weiss are going to be working on.
Okay. That's interesting. I think in the internet culture, and really just folks who maybe don't work creatively in the first place, when someone has like a hit and a consistent record with creative output, there's this misconception that somebody is always going to be good. But like every artist, even the best ones have some misses, know?
Ups and downs. Even Spielberg made some bad movies.
Yeah, no, that's true. Our most beloved director, you think of the greatest directors of all time, and all of them have at least one or two movies that weren't very good.
Yeah, I think the people that are worried about this, like we can understand that, if you're a good writer and a good director, you can have a misfire every once in a while. I think this is more worried about the integrity of the writers, to keep their characters consistent instead of just trying to subvert expectations and go for shock value.
Yeah.
They want to make sure that they're going to be given stories and characters that are consistent with themselves. I try to be easy because I'm not a creator. I don't write books. I don't write stories. So I have to try and tone back my criticism because I don't know what it's like to run a multi-million-dollar TV show and have all this responsibility on. But I feel like at the very least, you should be consistent with your characters and consistent with your story and have some kind of a responsibility to make sure it's done right, as opposed to just going like, well, nobody's expecting us, so we're gonna kill a dragon just to make this episode exciting. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like that was that example of them just having this fleet come out of nowhere and kill the dragon. Like, there's no real reason for that. There was a different way you could have. I understand why they wanted to kill one of the dragons, because if you have two dragons, it's kind of overpowered when you're fighting in medieval times. So they want to kind of even the odds a little bit. But there was better ways to do that. And I think that's what people are worried about, is the integrity of these writers. Is what are they going to do when they get a hold of this beloved franchise? Are they going to just try to put something shocking out there that doesn't make any sense, that's not going to be great? Or are they actually going to take the time and create something that's worth the fandom? You know what I mean?
I think the undercurrent of what you're saying also has to do with commercial influences as well. Because like I've written creatively and commercially, and ideally when you're writing something, you're right, you do want to develop everything as organically as possible and have balance and understandable motivations for the turns of the story and the character's decisions. Yeah. That's usually, though, really only present like maybe in like a novel or something like that, in literature. In films and television, you have a lot more commercial interests. You have, like notoriously, we're going to write the story like this. Oh, but the producer wants us to do this.
Studio influence.
Right. We got to do it, or else he's going to pull funding from this scene we really need. So, okay, we have to make him be a villain. or and maybe that's what part of the concern is too. Maybe they got the nod from Disney. Hey, wrap this up as quickly as possible so we can pay you more money to work on this.
Yeah.
Or maybe somebody at HBO, we don't know, behind the scenes had some ideas like, hey, if you guys want that bonus, you want those royalties, we need you to include this cool scene that Phil Jones or whoever really wants to see. Who knows what took place? But I can see that being a concern because maybe you do get a note from Disney, you do get a note from Kathleen Kennedy or whoever it is that's working on it, and at the end of the day, I mean, as much as creatives want to have integrity, when you're working with this amount of money, it's also a job, and you literally got to do what you got to do.
Yeah.
We forget that actors and screenwriters and directors are also paid professionals. They're contractors, and they have a job they got to do, or they don't. They can get sued because of the amount of money that's being tossed around.
And I think that's one of the things that happened with Mark Hamill. Because we know, I mean, it's fairly obvious at this point that he wasn't happy with the way Luke was portrayed. Mm-hmm. But like you said, he's a professional actor. He was paid a certain amount of money. He was paid to deliver the director's vision.
Mm-hmm.
I think,
and he did it.
And he did it. And I think that can be kind of like a sign of the times too. Because if you look back at some of the older movies that like Robert Redford and Harrison Ford were involved in back in the 80s and 70s and stuff, like the actors, I feel like had a lot more pull. Back then, where I know Harrison Ford, especially with George Lucas, like would tell him straight up, like, this is a dumb line. I'm not going to say it. I'll ad lib something. I'll make something up myself. Cause he had that famous quote. He's like, you can write this stuff, but you can't say it, George. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And I think we're seeing less and less of that in modern movies where these people are on the hook for millions and millions of dollars and can be sued by the studio if they're not doing what they're told. We have all those instances of creative differences between actors and filmmakers and studios. It's a complicated mess. And it can fall apart real quickly if you're not in line with what everybody else wants.
That depends too on the director. Like George Lucas, from what I've read, Mark Hamill has said, he didn't really have like a lot of notes because he had a couple movies under his belt, but a lot of the day-to-day actual direction he left to other people, like the second unit and the cinematographer. So it could have been that Harrison Ford got away with that stuff because he just didn't know Lucas had to handle actors with that kind of personality. I doubt like someone like Martin Scorsese or Francis Ford Coppola would have, taken crap from Harrison Ford, you know. But you are right. There's nowadays, in the age of the blockbuster franchise, there's a lot of money riding on doing everything exactly the way that you're told.
Yeah.
And it's we'll talk about this a little bit later, but that's got to be a concern as well. Maybe you have a certain vision, it's compromised because, well, we can't have him do that because then we can't make this Burger King toy. Nobody will want to buy that toy. And yeah, it'll be really interesting to see, how things turned out. I think that these new trilogies, whether they take place in the distant past or the distant future, are also a good opportunity to maybe quiet down some of the bizarre schisms that have erupted between fandom, regarding the movies.
I think, the farther away we are from some beloved characters, when you make your own character up and when you have something that's new, you can make them do whatever you want and it'll be consistent with that character, as opposed to dealing with somebody who's as iconic as Luke Skywalker or Harrison Ford as Han Solo, Princess Leia, all that stuff. So it's definitely a move in the right direction to kind of get away from those iconic characters so that you don't affect the way people see them in previous movies that they were beloved in. Mm-hmm. So that's a good thing. I'm looking forward to it. I know D&D or Benioff and Weiss, whatever you want to call them. So people say D&D because it's David and David.
Okay.
Benioff and Weiss, I know that they're getting a lot of slack or crap from the Game of Thrones fandom, and it's deserved as far as I'm concerned. I am looking forward to see what they're doing. If they have their own creative control, if they're not in a rush to move off to greener pastures, maybe they'll put something out there that's really good. And I'm hoping that the story is interesting. Like I said, I'm really interested in the idea of the Sith and Jedi at the point where they separate. I think that'd be kind of a cool story to explore. As long as they're working with the right people, their cinematography from Game of Thrones is up there, like way, way up there. Movies, for a TV show, it's got movie quality cinematography.
Yeah.
And special effects are really good. So if they're working with the same group of people, or if they know how to get the best out of people as far as the actors go and stuff like that, I think we could be looking at something really, really good. I'm just hopeful.
Yeah.
Like I understand that people are irritated with them and that they think they're going to drop the ball on Star Wars, and I hope they don't, but I understand where that worry comes from.
Yeah, I think so too.
And especially, I just remembered Kathleen Kennedy has had problems with directors in the past, especially with Solo. You remember the whole debacle with what happened with that?
I haven't seen it yet. I was going to watch it tonight.
It's okay.
Yeah?
It wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, but it's definitely got some issues.
Because like Lord Miller departed, and then Ron Howard kind of cleaned up.
Yeah, I think they had 60%, right? Up to 60% of the movie done already.
Okay.
And Ron Howard had to come in and basically reshoot the entire thing.
Oh wow.
Yeah, because Lord Miller, they had it. According to one of the actors, I can't remember if it was Emilia Clarke or if it was Eldon, whatever his name is. Mm-hmm. They said that they were playing it off like almost like a Ace Ventura skit, where it was all very, very ad-libbed, very, very comedic. It didn't.
Well, that's their background too.
Yeah,
it was family
weird
comedy.
Yeah, I don't know how that would work in a Star Wars movie, but
especially one that deals with like organized crime. And
yeah, I don't know. That would have been a little weird. I don't know if that would have worked out the way people think. But I think Ron Howard, for his credit, should be given a hand, because he took a scrambled mess and made at least a coherent movie out of it. Some people didn't like it. Some people thought it was boring and dumb, which it's fine if that's what you think. I enjoyed it for the most part. And I think there was a petition or like a fan movement to get Solo 2 to happen.
Yeah.
And people were on Twitter, like, they had like t-shirts that said Solo 2 on it and stuff like that. And I saw a poster where it had an older Darth Maul in the background, Emilia Clarke, Han Solo, Chewbacca, all in this like fake movie poster. And it said Han Solo and the Crimson Dawn, which Crimson Dawn is the name of the organization that Maul was in charge of, the criminal organization. Yeah. And I'm like, that sounds freaking awesome. That almost like a callback to like the old Indiana Jones movies, where it was like kind of like a swashbuckling adventure. You see your favorite characters get into a mess and they have to work their way out of it. And plus you have Darth Maul and you have Emilia Clarke acting as Kira. I'm like, that sounds freaking awesome to me. If you give Ron Howard that whole movie from start to finish, he doesn't have to like come back and fix somebody else's mess. I think it could be really good.
Yeah. I think so too. Ultimately, though, I think that you hit the nail on the head that for the future, the further away they can get from Obi-Wan and the Skywalkers and all that, the better. Yeah. That's been, from my perspective, the tension between fandom recently, especially highlighted with The Last Jedi. As you know, you and I have different views on the movie. I actually like the movie, How
dare you?
See, we're not yelling at each other, listeners. We're, civilly here.
So I'm sure I'll get it. How are you friends with him? Oh my God.
You need to kill him immediately. The thing is, like, I was just looking at it as like a standalone film. As a film, I enjoyed it, and I was disappointed in some parts, like other people were, because I didn't want to see the big Skywalker fight moments and Leia to go out a certain way. But I didn't like hate it. I didn't have intense passion one way or the other. But online, it's either you love it or you hate it.
Yeah, there's no room for
it's almost like Crips and Bloods. It's ridiculous. But I think Disney has to be thinking now about the current generation, because what's interesting is that I was talking to some younger people who have only ever seen the two newest Star Wars movies. They've never seen the original trilogy. Mm-hmm. They've never seen the prequels. All they've seen is the new ones, and they didn't understand why people were upset about it, because they have no attachment to these original characters. Right. They don't care if to them, Luke is just the mentor, the wise mentor that showed up.
Yeah.
They don't care if he had like a big fight or not. It's kind of like if the original trilogy was actually from the 70s, was actually the second one. There was an original one in the 50s where Alec Guinness was young, and we're like, Obi-Wan didn't get his final fight against Darth Vader. Yeah. I can't believe it.
Or he died. How could he die?
How could he just die? He's
the first episode.
Yeah. Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So I understand that. So eventually things are going to shift. This is already people's first experience with Star Wars. And I think it is a smart move just from a business standpoint to move things away from that hotbed of emotions and into like you said, a wide playing field where they can have original Or they can have her dog snoring.
My dog is laying on the couch. She's snoring in the background.
The
Hopefully you
dog,
can't hear
the
it.
dog is not enjoying this topic.
You have the most boringest podcast ever. No, anyway, yeah. So to speak on that point, I think I had some problems with The Last Jedi more on the plot. I understand that idea that like, oh, Luke. People have said it. This isn't Luke's trilogy. It's not really about him. It's about the new generation. I more had problems with the plot. Like I could have forgiven that. Like as much as I want to see Luke Skywalker be freaking Luke Skywalker, I could have forgiven it if the plot itself would have been better. If maybe we had a more flushed out version of Rey where she actually it didn't take place over 2 days. It actually had some time for her to evolve a little bit.
Yeah, that was very rushed. You're right.
Yeah. So I mean, there's parts of it where I can understand your point of view and I get it. But just for me, I think the whole movie as itself has just kind of failed to capture people, because even people who like it, there are things that you have to be like, yeah, that could have been done better.
That's true.
So I mean, there's things for that for every movie. But somebody online made that joke about like, how dare they didn't give Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Yoda a scene together in the original trilogy. How dare them? I'm like, yeah, we get it. It's not the same though, because it's not the same cultural relevance. You have to take. Yes, you can talk about a movie being separated and being its own story, but you have to take into account the millions and millions of people who watch and love it.
I think this is kind of something we predicted back in our cinematic universes episode, that when you have these giant franchises that keep extending indefinitely, you're going to have these collective emotions snowballing.
Yeah.
Someone's going to want to see, no, I need to see Captain Incredible, destroy the blimp as he was prophesied. How can you have,
Yeah.
And maybe as interesting and successful as Marvel's been, maybe that's one of the drawbacks that people aren't thinking about. If you pull it off, there's a dark underbelly to it, in that people are going to get really, really, really attached to the outcome for a really long time.
Yeah. And Star Wars is definitely one of the more, I don't know what the word is. I don't want to say obsessed, but like the fandom as a whole is very, very attached, and they have I guess I'm part of it. We have flushed out these characters in our own brains as much as possible. We know the backstory for freaking extra characters in cantinas and stuff. Like, oh, I know that guy. He's so and so, and he's got the death sentence on 12 systems because he did this, this, and this. Like, we know all this extra information about these characters. And when you have somebody come in and write a story and maybe it doesn't match up with what you know about these characters, you're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. They wouldn't do that, or,
Especially because if you're age, I don't know, 30, 35 or above, there was a long period where there were no Star Wars films.
Yeah, all we had was the books.
You just had the books and the comic books, and that was it. So necessarily it's been built up over time, in our heads that, man, when it finally comes, it's going to be like this and like that. And
I mean, not to turn this into a Star Wars podcast, but like for Luke Skywalker, like I'm kind of with Mark Hamill. I have a fundamental disagreement with what his character did. We saw him in the original trilogy. I made this comment the other day on Twitter. I was like, we saw him in the original trilogy tell Ben Kenobi, Obi-Wan and Yoda both wanted him to go and kill Vader. Right. Like, Vader's lost. Yeah. He's not going to come back. Anakin is dead. Vader is the only thing that's left. You have to kill him because he's evil. Luke Skywalker, wake that dog up. Wake the dog up. Hey, pup. Oh, God. Was I trying to sleep? God, it was so distracting. Like, Vader was evil. He was pure evil. He was the second most evil man in the galaxy. And Luke Skywalker was like, I can't kill him. He's my father. There is still good in him. And then we have a character later on that we see that's supposed to be Luke Skywalker say, I saw evil in him in a dream, so I had to kill him.
Yeah.
Like, fundamentally, that character probably wouldn't have thought that. Like, it's okay for people to say, like, well, he's just a human being. He can make mistakes. He's not perfect. Like, no, you're absolutely right. He can make mistakes. He's not perfect. But that one thing, as far as we know about his character, he would not have crossed that line. He wouldn't even have thought about it. Like, he didn't think about killing Vader. He just had to defend himself, and he had to make Vader stop fighting. That was part of the battle between father and son to defeat him but not kill him. but he was already evil. Ben Kenobi or Ben Solo, as far as we knew, wasn't evil at that point. He had this darkness inside him. And you can still have that same Luke Skywalker where he, Ben turns on him and he ends up having to go into hiding because he's outnumbered, he's outpowered, Ben's stronger than him in some way, and with Snoke's backing, he can't take on the whole First Order by himself. He has to run and hide to possibly protect the old Jedi way or something like that. Those books that we find for the Force, the Journal of the Wills and stuff, like protect him. Not to run away in shame, but just to run away to bide his time.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would have been more in line with his character, and I think that would have worked out better for the fandom and as a whole. Like, it would have paid respect. We don't have to have him, as much as we'd like to see it, we don't have to have him have some crazy huge battle scene. But it would have been
just
nice,
a logical
conclusion to his character where he didn't turn into the bad guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's all that I would personally be asking for.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's my argument.
Okay. So let's check in real quick. So there's a new announcement about Batman.
Yes.
And it seems, I don't know, maybe the DC cinematic universe got spanked really hard.
Dead.
Yeah.
I think it's dead. I think we're gonna get one-offs from now on.
I think that's the best way to go.
I do too. I think it's their strong suit.
I think so too. Look, like this Joker movie, for example, is very interesting to me. Number one, just what they're attempting with it. It's a much smaller budget. Mm-hmm. It's not an indie budget, but it's small.
Was it like 60 million or 70 million or something?
Something like that, yeah. But it's small by modern Hollywood standards.
Right.
It has, 3 actors you would never ordinarily see in a superhero movie. Joaquin Phoenix, Robert De Niro, and Mark Maron, right? And when you look at the trailer, it has very, very obvious callbacks and influences to early Scorsese films.
Yep, Taxi Driver, I think, is one of the main ones.
I see the King of Comedy in there a lot. Yeah,
a lot of similarities.
So if that's the way they're going, I think that's great. I'd love to see with this new Batman that was announced, like you said, a period film. Mm-hmm. Actually, you know what I'm thinking of right now? In the vein of this Joker movie, I'd like to see one-off DC Cinematic Universe movies taking place in certain periods, but in the style of certain directors. Imagine like a Batman film noir film in the style of Orson Welles, taking place in the 30s or 40s. Mm. And, just building off that aesthetic. You could do one in the 60s, one in the 70s, based off whatever visual style of a particular director at that time you feel is appropriate. It might even be good because instead of copying Marvel's niche, which is the large shared franchise, you could have something very similar in which DC builds their own form of storytelling, where it is these small stories that have maybe little nods that they're interconnected, but they can be enjoyed just as one piece by itself. That could be the way out for them, I'm thinking. But I don't know. What do you think?
I'm for that.
Yeah.
I like the one-offs, and I like the idea that they're going to do something different with each character. And an interesting thing about the Joker movie is, I think, based off of its trailer, and I think some information online, is it's set in the 80s.
Okay.
And it's set kind of to like the idea of like a what is it? What the Wall Street? What was it? The riot on Wall Street where they were like boycotting. What was that called? It was a movement. I can't remember what it was called.
Yeah, I can't. Yeah.
But anyway, there was like some kind of an economic failure.
Occupy Wall Street.
Yeah, there was some kind of an economic
shifting
failure.
Shifting it back in time, huh?
Yeah, they're going to be. That's where these riots come from, with the clown faces that are mocking Gotham's economic advancements. Like, oh, you've ruined this city, and I think there's going to be some kind of a pushback between the elite. Like Thomas Wayne is going to be one of the main characters, and this resurgence of the little man, the people of this town are going to riot against the rich.
Okay.
And I think that's where this origin is going to come from with Fleck. What's his name? Arthur Fleck. Okay. Which is the Joker's actual name. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm hoping for the best. I do think it's going to be really dark. I don't think it's going to be comedic in any way. I think it's going to be a dark retelling of the Joker's origin.
Yeah, that's good.
And I think it's interesting that we have Arthur Fleck, who is an older guy. He looks like he's in his 40s, maybe, and maybe even 50s. Joaquin Phoenix is pretty old. And then in the trailer, we have a young Bruce Wayne, and he's like maybe 10. He's not even close to being Batman yet. So I'm wondering if they're going to make the Joker responsible for the death of Thomas and Martha Wayne in some way. But that's going to lead into the Joker's going to be way too old by the time Batman comes around. So I don't think they're going to continue the story. Like I said, I think it's going to be a one-off.
Yeah.
Like, here's the story about, this guy named Arthur Fleck,
Yeah.
who became the Joker.
Right.
And then we have Matt Reeves with his Batman trilogy. Or, I think it's a trilogy.
I thought it was a one-off.
I'm hearing two different things.
Oh.
I'm hearing one-off and I'm hearing trilogy. So I'm not sure. Maybe if one does really well, obviously they're going to want to make more.
So maybe DC is just cautiously like,
yeah,
we'll see.
I don't think they're going to go for the whole like cinematic universe where everything's interconnected. I think they're just going to make movies. And if one movie does particularly well, maybe they'll make another one.
Mm-hmm.
But the big announcement is that Robert Pattinson has gotten the gig for being Bruce Wayne and Batman.
Okay.
Which...
That's not bad.
It's an interesting choice.
Yeah.
I know he's still almost living in the shadow of Twilight, which is the first thing a lot of people say.
That's not fair.
That's not fair. No, it is not fair. It's almost been 20 years, 15 years since then, and he's been working his butt off in like the indie film area and doing some really good work as an actor.
Yeah.
And I checked out some of his work as a British guy. He was playing some Southern cowboy or something in some indie film. Not even a trace of a British accent.
Wow.
Really, really well acted. He kind of disappeared into the role. I didn't even recognize him because I had never watched the Twilight movies, but I know his face. He looks way different now. He like shaved his head. He had this weird little mustache going on. He really disappeared into the role. So I'm looking forward to seeing him. I think he can act good and well enough to portray Bruce Wayne, a young Bruce Wayne, young Batman. The physical stature is where I'm hoping he kind of works more on. Because obviously I've always pictured Batman as this big barrel-chested, wide-shouldered, imposing presence. I actually personally think Christian Bale was a little bit too small. He's a pretty thin guy. Like, he was muscular, but he was really tiny.
Well, you saw what he came from before that,
yeah,
right?
From The Machinist. Yeah, it's crazy what that guy does to his body for all his movies and stuff.
Yeah, I think he says he's done with that.
I hope so. It's unhealthy.
The Dick Cheney film, he's like, that's the last time he's doing that to his body.
Yeah, he gained like 60 pounds for that role. Wow. So I'm hoping that Robert Pattinson works on his physical appearance a little bit. I think acting wise he'll be fine. And I don't want to put the Twilight in my mind at all.
Yeah.
He's done with that. That was a dumb teenage movie. He's over it. He didn't even like those movies. Have you ever seen interviews of him talking about Twilight? He freaking hated those movies. He was like, he said one time, he's like, yeah, I read the book in preparation and I was reading it. And this is a quote from him. He's like, it felt like a book that shouldn't have been published.
Oh, man.
He was, yeah, okay. He's bagging on those
But what
movies.
are you going to do? I mean, if you're an actor and you get a gig like that, you take it.
Yeah, you take it. You're a young actor. You want to get some money. You want to get your name out there. I mean, I guess that's what he did, but he did not like those movies at all. So I'm not holding Twilight against him.
No.
I'm looking at his acting career, and so far he's done a lot of really cool indie movies, and I think he's going to be a surprise.
So what approach would you like to see in this Batman movie?
Well, Matt Reeves has actually stated that he's going to be focusing more on Batman's detective skills.
Oh, good.
And it's going to be less it's going to be less of a big budget fight scene movie.
Good.
And it's going to be more of a, intelligent.
That's smart.
I think it's really cool. And they also announced recently that there's going to be up to 6 villains in this movie. It's going to be like the Rogues Gallery is going to be all there. And I think the 2 main ones are going to be Penguin and Catwoman again.
Okay.
Which some people are like, oh no, they're just going to remake Batman Returns with, Keaton and Danny DeVito. And I'm like, I don't think that's what they're going to do.
No.
I think they're going to use these characters a lot differently. And my hope, somebody tweeted out, it was Nerd Soup. I listen to their podcast. They're awesome guys. Nerd Soup, Bo and Aaron were talking about it. And they were, Bo was saying that he wanted the Penguin to be like this imposing presence, like a British gangster. And I'm like, that immediately clicked into my head because I'm a big fan of Peaky Blinders. And it's actually funny, Tom Hardy plays this character in that show, like a very, very British gangster, hardcore, like, I'm like, now I can't get that out of my head. I can't get that idea of this like really awesome 1940s to 50s British gangster as the Penguin, I think that would be perfect.
It's like a Bob Hoskins.
Yeah, I'm all for it. I don't even care what they do to the rest of them. Like, give me that.
That'd be cool. So like maybe you have an established Batman in this established ecosystem where there's all these crime families and so to speak. Yeah.
I think this might be, because of Pattinson's age, I think this might be a young Batman.
When he's first starting out.
Year one almost. So I'm thinking that's what I have no idea for sure, but I think that's where they're going to go with it, because they cast somebody who's very, very young compared to some of the other actors that have played Batman. So
right.
I'm interested, man. I'm going to give him a shot. I'm looking forward to it. Matt Reeves is a competent director, and Robert Pattinson is a really good actor. So I'm hopeful.
Cool.
And I think DC is on the right track with these like one-off spin-off films. There's no need to copy even as successful as Marvel is, there's no reason to just like cut and copy.
Right.
You can do your own thing and still be successful.
Yeah.
And I think that's what they're going to do.
And this might be good for filmmaking in general, because one thing we talked about in our old Cinematic Universe podcast is, having to pitch a franchise for every movie is maybe it's fun in the short term, but for filmmaking over the long term, it's not a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so maybe having...
It stifles creativity.
It does. It stifles creativity. And, people, creatives, directors, actors, writers don't want to sign on for a 7-picture deal or what have you. They want to try other things. But having a competing franchise philosophy might be a good thing,
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Go ahead. You have something else to say?
No, that was it.
Okay. Is that the last of our topics? Fan questions. So I tweeted out anybody had any questions, and we've got a couple here. Matt Vader, you can follow him on Twitter at MattVader74. He's a local here at Las Vegas. I meet him for coffee on Mondays. Super cool guy. He said, now this is going to be moving back to Star Wars. He said, if Disney is trying to remove Sith and Jedi from Star Wars, that's a comment directed towards the idea that Rey and Kylo will end up dissolving the Jedi and the Sith. Like Kylo, that was kind of his goal in The Last Jedi.
Okay.
And Rey, as being kind of a fledgling Jedi and being told all the flaws that the Jedi have been, narrow-minded and in their hubris or whatever, explained by Luke, that they might want to disband those two factions and kind of bring the Force back to like a central thing. And also, it's the end of the Skywalker trilogy. That's what they're claiming 9 is. It's going to be the end of everything that we've seen. It's going to come to an end now.
Okay.
So, is it still going to be Star Wars if you remove the Sith and the Jedi?
Sure.
I think it is. I
yeah.
think Star Wars can be many things. It's a big universe. As long as it's well written, well thought out, I think it'll be successful no matter what. The fandom is definitely, as divided as we are, we're there. Like, when something good comes out, we freaking buy into it 100%. So I think we were talking a little bit earlier before the podcast, like my idea for the future, if they want to move into the future of Star Wars instead of going back in the past like they're doing right now, have the threat be external. We know it's a huge galaxy. The Outer Rim is vastly unexplored. My idea was like, the Sith and the Jedi, if you're going to disband them and have them become one, like the theory is that the Skywalkers, quote unquote Skywalkers, are just going to be the new Force users. As like instead of the Jedi and Sith, it'll just be the Skywalkers moving forward. So if you want to have in the future, you want to have this faction of Skywalkers where they're all, Force sensitive, Force users in training, almost like Jedi-esque, Samurai-esque kind of a thing. Have some kind of an external threat come from the Outer Rim or possibly from outside the galaxy, some kind of a group of aliens that are like conquerors, like Vikings or something style, where they come in, they just want to conquer territory and take over the galaxy, and have the Skywalkers have to fight them off to protect the overall galaxy, which is what the Jedi were supposed to be in the beginning. They were the keepers of peace and the protectors of the galaxy. So I think they could still do that. It's still Star Wars. It's still a war in the star. It's still operatic. They're still going to have this big overarching story. But we can explore different types of characters and different types of factions. And I think it'll still hold up.
I agree with you completely. I think it feels weird because every Star Wars film and TV show has always been framed within the context of this struggle between the Sith and the Jedi.
Yeah.
But there's no reason why it has to stay tied to that. You can evolve beyond that. You can see for example, if we do jump into the future, you can see how these beliefs evolve, how they change over time, and how that affects the society these people live in.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of really interesting things that you can play around with this.
Yeah. And I mean, there's always going to be that internal conflict that Star Wars is pretty much, you boil it down to, it's good versus evil. It's temptation versus, reservation. So you have the temptation of the dark side for power, for, to become a conqueror versus the Jedi who are more peaceful. You have that internal struggle, and I think you can still bring that into the universe. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be some people who are like, well, the bad guys are just going to be the new Sith, like, sarcastic, like, oh, it's just all the same. They're just relabeling it, which maybe that's possible. But I think there's a lot to explore, and I think it could be done right. The next question from Roger, cool guy. He runs his own podcast. If you guys want to listen to Roger's podcast, he's over there at the Scarif Scuttlebutt. You guys can check him out on iTunes. It's a 100% Star Wars podcast. Really cool, guys. His question is, what do you think of the streaming channels taking away the thunder from first-run theater releases? Advantages, disadvantages. So he's talking about... I think he's talking about more like the stories of streaming services. Like you got Game of Thrones, you've got Amazon has a ton of original content, taking on kind of more of the better storylines, the better characters than the theaters now. The theaters are almost exclusively just rehashes of old franchises.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of the original content is coming on streaming services.
Right.
So do you think that's going to kind of cut away at the theatrical releases? Do you think it's going to affect how people view the cinema?
That's a really good question. Okay, this is my take. I feel that the film industry right now is where the music industry was in the early 2000s, where you had record companies that were focusing not so much on quality of artistry, but more like pumping out 2 or 3 singles, and you got to buy a whole CD for it. That led to Napster, the rise of piracy, which led to iTunes and MP3s, which led to the streaming stuff that we have now. So I think there's a definite paradigm shift that we're on the cusp of experiencing. It is very difficult right now to get indie movies off the ground for theatrical release, or for people to go out and see it.
Yeah.
Because movies are very expensive right now. I mean, just to take your family to go see, a Marvel movie, it's going to be maybe like $60, $70, for the
tickets
whole
are
family.
$14 a pop.
Jeez.
For opening night.
Yeah. And, so it's understandable that, maybe you want to go see an indie movie and support those up and coming filmmakers, but you can't afford it, so you naturally say, well, I'll just wait till it's on video or what have you.
A lot of people say that about the Marvel movies, especially
Yeah.
if they're not fans of the Marvel. They're like, I'm not going to go see it. I'll just wait till it comes out.
Right. So I think what's going to happen is, I think we're going to have almost like 2 different types of incubators for films. I think that the theater experience is going to be reserved mostly for the big, epic, blockbuster, mainstream
Tentpole,
things. Yeah. And I think Netflix, Hulu, and all those are going to be the new progenitors, the patrons of the indie film industry. Because they're focused more on putting out content, I think. I mean, they have quality control, of course, but their main attraction is that they have a lot of content, and you can try out different things for one set price. What's going to be troublesome for them is the fact that there's so many streaming services now, and I think that's going to bring back piracy.
Yeah.
Does it take away the thunder from the early film releases? Not necessarily. It depends on what kind of film it is. I think people are always going to want to see like a World War II film or something like that, a big sci-fi Star Wars on the big screen.
Yeah.
But they'll be okay with watching something more intimate at home on Netflix or what have you.
And I think eventually I do believe that we're going to have the option. Like, I think there's going to be a set amount of people who are like, I don't really care about going to the movies. It's expensive. I don't really eat I'm not going to eat popcorn or whatever. I'd rather just watch it at home. You almost do like a pay-per-view thing. Yeah. You can pay $50 to get get this movie for 24 hours. You can invite your friends over and watch it in your living room, or you can go to the movies and see it.
Right.
And for people like us who enjoy the cinema, enjoy the experience of going to a cinema, we can actually go and watch it. Or there's the other option of people who have families and don't want to spend, $150 on a movie ticket, can just have their family watch it at home for a set amount of money. So I think there's going to be eventually, if the market is calling for it, there's going to be somebody who's going to take up that, if there's a demand, somebody will take it.
Yeah. You see that already happening with Netflix, because they just had, I believe it was the first Netflix film that debuted at the Cannes Film Festival, right? It was, hold on. I don't remember who it was. It was Roma by Alfonso Cuarón, the new Alfonso Cuarón movie.
Yep.
It premiered at Cannes, but it was a Netflix film. Netflix completely financed it as an independent film. But that, I believe, started some conversation about, so like Netflix, there were some traditionalists that were saying, no, you have to go through the theater experience. It's got to debut at the theater, at an actual movie theater.
And there are a set of rules where you are not eligible for like Oscars or any kind of a cinematic award if you don't go through the theatrical release.
Yeah.
And that's, for people who, I don't really give a crap about awards. It doesn't bother me. But for people, especially filmmakers who want to have that on their resume, like, I'm Oscar winning, this and that. It's difficult, especially for indie directors who want to do that. They might be looking at streaming services to get their movie out there, but then they're not eligible for those awards. It causes a conflict. Like, well, what makes my movie any different than yours? Just because you had the money to spend to put it on a theatrical release, that doesn't change the artistry or the work that we put into it. We should still be eligible. So there's a fight going on. I'm not sure how that's going to end up. It's not really my wheelhouse.
It seems to me like this whole thing that it has to go through a first run in theaters is meant to support the existing power structure, with the studios and the producers and the distributors as the gatekeepers for content.
Yeah.
It's going to change eventually. That's my feeling.
Yeah. Eventually it'll come to a point where enough people who are in a younger generation who aren't the traditionalists are going to want awards given to these movies.
Yeah. And not everyone cares about awards either.
I don't. I could give two craps about Oscars and all that stuff.
I think, it was a movie critic one time. He said, it was like, for people who worried about, it was because there was some debate over some Oscar winner that, that basically somebody was a great director because they had like 3 Oscars or something. And the critic made the point. He's like, well, that may be, but guess what? I hold the same amount of Oscars as Akira Kurosawa, as Robert Altman, as David Lean, like all these great directors of the past. They never won a single Oscar, but they made the most influential movies of all time. So if you're using that as your barometer, then,
Yeah, that's not good. Yeah, that's why I don't care about awards. Don't mean anything to me. It's like if your movie's good and I enjoyed it, then it's great. If it has an effect on the overall culture, then that's even better.
Okay, good for you. Yeah.
Yeah. You don't have to win an Oscar just to have an effect. I think one of the thing that comes to mind is it not only did it win a bunch of awards, but Lord of the Rings trilogy was hugely had a huge effect on the pop culture.
Absolutely.
And they happened to win a bunch of awards, but if they didn't win those awards, the movies still would have had the same effect.
Right.
It's just something to put on a resume. It's like, I got this award. I got this. It's a recognition thing from the studios and from the industry.
And I'm sure it helps you get extra funding in the future.
It's good to have. I'm not trying to poo-poo it like you shouldn't even worry about it. Obviously, there's benefits to getting those awards, but for me as a content viewer and somebody who's just watching stuff on Netflix and Amazon, it doesn't bother me. Like, don't worry about getting an award. I'm still going to watch your movie. If it comes across my streaming service and I check it out and I love it, great. Like, there's this really awesome show on HBO right now called Chernobyl, where it's I'm not sure if it's a straight like actual story of people who are involved or if it's just an adaptation from a true story. I haven't really dived into what's actually going on, but it's amazing. The sound design, the cinematography, the acting is all top notch. It's really, really well done. And I have no idea if it's going to win any awards or not, but I really enjoy this movie, and I keep telling people who haven't seen it yet, you need to go check it out. Like, here's my freaking HBO password. Go watch it so we can talk about it. It's a really, really great show, and I think that if you just do that, I think that's enough. You just put out the best work you can, and you get recognized for it.
I agree
That's just
with
my
you.
take. Last question is from Proper Jeremy. You can follow him on Twitter at Proper Jeremy, and I think he has a YouTube channel too. Yes, he does have a YouTube channel. I don't think he has one. He does have one. You can go check his YouTube channel out. His question is there a movie that you despise more than The Goonies?
This must be aimed at you.
This is aimed at me. The answer to that question is probably I despise The Last Jedi more for what it did to the fandom than I do for actually its failings as a movie. Given the choice between watching that and The Goonies, that's a tough one. I don't know. The Goonies is hard to watch, but The Last Jedi is equally as difficult. I reject your hypothesis, and I just don't watch either of them.
I think he's trying to figure out the security question for your email.
Yeah. I hate The Goonies. ... It's
got to be one of these.
You know what's funny, dude? It keeps coming up. Like I got invited to do a stream with somebody where we watched The Goonies, and it was me versus a bunch of people who love the movie.
Yeah.
Like I was sitting there like nitpicking the crap out of it, trying to destroy it, and they were like, "Oh no, it's nostalgic. We love it." And that was fun and all that stuff. I just recently got invited to another podcast where they're going to talk about The Goonies, and they were like, we need somebody who doesn't like the movie to come on as a difference opinion. Can you come on? I'm like, for somebody who hates this movie so much, I sure do get asked to talk about it a lot.
Well, I think that's probably because you're the only person that most people know that doesn't like The Goonies.
Oh, God. That movie is
You're seriously the only person I've ever met that doesn't like The Goonies.
I hate that movie. You know, people are like, well, when did you see it? Maybe you weren't the right age. I'm like, no, I was the perfect age. I was like 10 or something.
Well, it just didn't speak to you. People have different experiences coming up, and it's okay.
I just didn't. I thought the characters were dumb. I thought the acting was horrible. I thought the story was kind of just blah. It just, I don't know. I just watched. I remember I had seen it and I knew I didn't like it. And then I was in school one time and we had like a movie day or whatever. It was like the end of the year. They didn't have anything else on the curriculum, so they were like, "Oh, we're just gonna watch a movie today." And I remember we had a vote between one or two movies, and one of them was The Goonies. And of course, the whole freaking class raised their hand. We want to watch The Goonies. And I was like, oh, God damn it. I'm like, can I go home? I was really young, and I specifically remember that going like, oh, God, why do people like this movie? I was a critic back then, dude. I don't know what to tell you. I hated that movie.
That's all right.
But yeah, that's all we have for fan questions. I appreciate everybody who commented. Please hit the like and subscribe button on iTunes. Leave a review if you like our stuff. That's always helpful. I don't really know. I don't pay attention, but I do read the comments. And if there's any critiques, if you guys want me to add anything, if you say I'm boring and I need to organize more, or if it's too long because we're at 1 hour and 45 minutes, let me know. I'm always looking to improve the content to the listeners. So again, thank you for listening, and we will talk to you next time.
Sign off.